Andrew WK isn't a real person, and I can prove it. Uplifting incel music. Celebrity is persona, self-examining publicly. It's the act of dissecting what it means to be a person, focused through the hyper-stylized lens of pop culture. It's a performance of being a human being for an audience. It's a way to commodify and monetize the human condition. From Andy Kaufman sabotaging his own career on purpose and becoming a woman-hating pro wrestler as performance art, to that weird fake boy band in the early 2000s that had Chris Farley's brother in it. But the intersection of persona, commerce, and authenticity has never been examined quite as interestingly as it has been by Andrew WK. Andrew Federally Wilkes Cryer was born May 9th, 1979 in Stanford, California, and grew up in Ann Arbor, Michigan, birthplace of seminal punk band The Stooges, influential noise group Wolf Eyes, and neo-soul singer Meyer Hawthorne. His parents were James E. Cryer, a widely regarded legal scholar, and Wendy Wilkes. Obviously his name is a hyphenate of theirs, but if you believe WK's actual official bio on the website of Bulb Records, the label that has released much of Andrew's more avant-garde music, there's a different explanation. In 1983 on Highway I-94 in Detroit, Michigan, a man named Andrew Stevenson was pulled over for drunk driving. When police stopped him and asked for his driver's license, he said he didn't have it on him, but that it was at his house, which he was returning to. The police asked Stevenson to step out of the car, a brand new Plymouth Acclaim, while they ran a check on his license plate. When the car came back stolen, Andrew Stevenson was arrested. However, the events that unfolded in the following 15 minutes would result in one of the weirdest musical personas of the new century. It was after he killed a teenage gas station attendant that the real trouble started. And it was at this point that he also killed two more people, his friends Todd Rivers and Sheila Arnold. This was when police nicknamed him Andrew the White Killer Stevenson, or simply the White Killer. Andrew's father was fond of this name, and as a chief officer on the police force, he named his son after the killer. A story that can't possibly be true because it says the killer was caught in 1987, but WK was born in 1979. Plus, his dad is not a cop. This is the beginning of a trend of obvious untruths woven into WK's life story and career that, for whatever reason, the general public just never seemed to pick up on. In reality, the name came from an elementary school teacher who used it to differentiate him from two of his classmates, Andrew Gilchrist and Andrew Cohen. And as it happens, one of those classmates, Andrew Cohen, would go on to become the aforementioned neo-soul singer Meyer Hawthorne, which is a stage name. WK grew up a lonely, socially awkward kid who struggled connecting with other people, but enjoyed music and art. For this very reason, he was enrolled in a private liberal arts school, which is probably why he was in the same class as another future famous singer. He trained as a classic pianist and listened to a wide variety of music, from death metal to avant-garde jazz to noise, and was also in a number of death metal and grindcore bands playing the drums. WK says that he experienced a lot of anger and depression as a kid, and that anger caused him to lash out and commit crimes that got him into a lot of trouble. Shoplifting, vandalism, and writing hot checks. At one point, he started forging and selling valuable baseball cards, and he even got busted for bank fraud once. These crimes were sometimes part of elaborate acts of cruelty against his friends. He once wrote a forged check to his friend that claimed to be from legendary underground cartoonist R. Crumb, interested in buying some of his work, just so he could see the look on his friend's face when he took it to the bank and discovered it was fake. These are stories that he's told numerous times on big platforms like Larry King Live, but like a mosaic or an AI-generated image, the closer you start to look at WK's public persona, inspecting its smaller details, the more something starts to seem off. As a whole, he's an entire person, a fully realized, larger-than-life rock star. In his bass parts, the unreality of WK begins to creep. According to WK, eventually his parents put him into child therapy, but after years of sessions, one day his longtime therapist concluded that he simply had a, quote, devilish side and ended their sessions permanently. This is a story that sounds like the made-up origin of a Harry Potter villain, but that he told during the same earnest interviews where he also talked about how much he loved his wife. The most troubling event came when WK was in high school. According to a confessional column in The Guardian in 2010, WK describes the time his high school crush filed a restraining order against him after he wrote her a love song. I was in high school in the 1990s in a town called Ann Arbor in Michigan. I had a crush on a girl and was deeply and passionately fixated on her. She had a baby face, a 14th smile, large eyes, a crowned forehead, an oversized brow, and a tender style. She consumed me with both lust and hatred. Lust because I was truly drawn to her beauty and soft skin, and hatred because she rarely spoke to me, wouldn't look at me much, and never gave me a chance to show my deep affections. I used to call her house just to listen to her say, "Hello?" Then I'd hang up, terrified and shaking with nervous ecstasy. In our senior year of high school, when I was 17, we were required to make a final project which was presented to the head of the school and graded as our final exam. This was when my crush was at its absolute height. I decided to write a song dedicated to her and submit it as my final project for graduation. The song was My Destiny. Called up your number 14 times to see if you were home. Home is where I'll find you, when I find you. Do you feel lonely when you're alone? A sheet to keep you warm. Warm. Electric blanket. An extra blanket. You are my destiny. I'll make you fall in love with me. I'll make myself your fantasy. Weeping like the willow tree. Drove past your doorway 15 times. I don't want to cause you harm. Harm. That's what you're in for, if you don't open your door. So I'll keep knocking a million times. I will knock until my knuckles bleed. Bleed. That blood will leave a stain. On you forever. You are my destiny. And I'll make you fall in love with me. 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 After putzing around the Ann Arbor music scene for a while, dabbling in baseball card forgery and getting restraining orders filed against him, WK finally decided to move to New York City in 1998 to pursue a music career. After a couple years working as a bubblegum salesman, an opera ticket salesman, a fashion photographer, a window decorator at the Bergdorf Goodman department store, and in the offices of the avant-garde fashion company Comme des Garçons, among other short-lived jobs, WK was gaining traction in the New York music scene. He started getting noticed by actual names in music like Donald Tardy from the death band Obituary and Dave Grohl, drummer from Nirvana and lead singer and guitarist of the Foo Fighters, if you didn't know for some reason. He eventually self-financed a handful of EPs which were released by the aforementioned Bulb Records, including a song called Girl's Own Juice. The song would eventually be re-recorded and appear on his debut album as Girl's Own Love, but let's hear a little bit of this version. People, start, killing, wherever she comes, When she comes, she leaves nothing to your world. And when she comes, I keep bringing it back. When she comes, she's leaving nothing to your world. And when she comes, I can visit your world. Girl's own juice, she gets what she wants. Girl's own juice, she gets what she needs. Girl's own juice, I get what I need. Girl's own juice, I need your love. Before he's known to the world as Andrew WK, before the first album is even recorded, the story is already developing a weird aftertaste, some kind of backmasked strangeness, hinting at a deeper meaning. His early recordings, especially when you see them performed live, bear little resemblance to the upbeat, pumping, quasi-metal jock anthems we know him for today. They're more akin to something from Ween's Pure Guava period, early They Might Be Giants, or the affected zaniness of Logan Whitehurst. Another interesting thing to note, on those early recordings, WK heavily alters and distorts his voice with effects. During his live performances, he doesn't even sing at all. It's very clear that he wasn't initially positioning himself as any kind of singer or performer with his music. However, after all the buzz around him, the attention from people like Dave Grohl, and on the strength of his early recordings, he was signed to Island Records in 2000 and recording on his debut album commenced. Some, however, would have you believe a different story. Those odd jobs you worked all sounded kinda made up, right? And how does an art rock weirdo with admittedly not particularly catchy music get noticed by the Grohlmeister? What if I told you that none of that was real? That Andrew WK was created in a lab or off the street and brainwashed, or he's a concept portrayed by multiple different actors, all orchestrated by a shadowy organization or Illuminati-style music business elites, or Dave Grohl himself. And he was genetically engineered or programmed to be the perfect rock star, or to pump satanic subliminal messaging into the minds of our youth. Well, I'm not telling you any of that because the reality is in a way stranger and far more fascinating. But we're not quite there yet. WK's major label debut studio album, I Get Wet, was released on November 13th of 2001 on Island Records. Continuing the sound established by his previous Bulb record EPs, I Get Wet is characterized by its metal and punk rock influences and lyrical content revolving around partying. Like, that can't be overstated. This album is about partying. Half of the songs have the word party in the title. Most of the rest of them mention partying at least once. This isn't just a party album like you'd throw it on at a party. The album is a party. In fact, you might want to avoid throwing it on at a party because the party that Andrew WK is having within the lyrical passages of these 12 tracks will make the party you're currently at seem lame by comparison and everybody will just leave. Or at least that's what it seems like on the surface. The album was released in the UK first to build hype, but was eventually brought to the States where it was met with immediate critical and commercial success. The first single, and easily WK's most well-known song, Party Hard, had a music video that exploded over the airwaves on MTV and catapulted WK into briefly becoming a household name. If not only just because of how overall strange and unique his whole thing was. And as a fun aside, WK has said that he recorded all of the instruments on his first album by himself and then assembled his band afterwards. He talked to Donald Tardy from Obituary and asked him to be the drummer, and then asked Tardy to assemble the rest of the band for him. According to WK, he didn't meet anybody in the band until the day of the music video shoot for Party Hard. Again, you will in time learn to take these claims from our ethereal protagonist with a grain of salt. But like, party salt. Like you'd put on the rim of a margarita. So the album comes out. Party Hard is a huge radio hit because, like, have you heard the song? It's literally just the words fuck yeah if they were a song. And he gets labeled as this weird, crazy, party goofball guy. He goes on to late night shows, does his party stoner dude shtick. Jay Leno rolls his eyes and mugs at the audience and he's like, get a load of this guy. And then he just kind of gets frozen in carbonite that way. He has another minor hit with She Is Beautiful, gets a short-lived TV show, appears on Warped Tour for several years, has some of his songs featured in some of the Jackass movies, cameos in the Aqua Teen Hunger Force movie with a new original song literally titled Party, 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 and then that's kind of it. But I kind of lied to you back there. You know, for noble, narrative reasons, to make the video more entertaining. Andrew WK's music isn't actually about partying. Anybody who thinks that clearly only ever listened to Party Hard and She Is Beautiful off of that album, and not even very closely. Here's a sampling of some of the lyrics off of various tracks on I Get Wet. From It's Time to Party. Tension in my hand. When you're standing there, not thinking anything, it's time to party. Doing it fast when you're doing it long. Keep getting your money, it's time to party. Pounding on one, touching yourself. It's not too late, it's time to party. Open your mouth, we're all gonna come. In your face. From Ready to Die. This is your time to pay. This is your judgment day. We made a sacrifice, and now we get to take your life. We shoot without a gun. We'll take on anyone. It's really nothing new. It's just a thing we like to do. From Party Till You Puke. We dent. We rob. We choke. We gun. We kill. We stab. We rob. We steal. And from I Get Wet. I get wet when the party is dying. I get wet without even trying. I get wet. I get wet whenever you're trying. I get wet when I know that you're dying. Whatever Andrew WK ended up becoming or representing, the first album was less like a series of party anthems and more like a discordant, post-apocalyptic gun orgy. Even the title of the album has a masked, sinister quality to it. During interviews, WK claimed that I Get Wet references the feeling of excitement, the fluids in your body, such as sweat, tears, and saliva, pumping in response to adrenaline running through your body. But there's a clear sexual connotation to the phrase, as well as the fact that getting wet is a well-known slang term for when somebody gets tricked into unknowingly smoking PCP. Coupled with the iconic album cover for I Get Wet, which depicts WK staring blankly into the camera with a glazed-over, vacant stare while blood oozes out of his nose and down his face, which, according to WK, was achieved by smashing himself in the face with a brick and then adding animal blood to the bleeding wound. It's clear that the title isn't about excitement or partying at all. And wouldn't he just name the album something more straightforward, like Adrenaline Rush or something, if that's the aesthetic he was trying to evoke? However, there was a deeper conspiracy being discussed than just whether or not WK's party cred was legit. Pretty much since the very beginning, before his first album had even dropped in the States, there was a rumor floating around. This rumor followed WK throughout the rest of his career. obviously up to this day because we're currently talking about it. A rumor that Andrew WK was actually just a fictional character, elaborately devised by a shadowy group of artists to satirize the hedonistic and manufactured lifestyle of the modern rock star, and that the Andrew WK we knew was actually played by several different actors. The many faces of Andrew WK. The conspiracy actually started popping up in the early days when I Get Wet was first released in the UK. A few random publications passingly mentioned that there was a rumor that Andrew WK was a hoax in their reviews of the album, a fake character created as satire. The most prevailing rumor was that he had been created by Dave Grohl as a joke on the music industry, and that he was dumping millions of dollars of his own money into funding the manufacturing of a famous rock star just to show everybody how easy it is to get on the radio if you have deep pockets. Literally nobody knows how these rumors got started, especially so early in WK's career. Well, I know, but I have to spend this whole video proving it out first. However, by the time I Get Wet came to the US and the music video for Party Hard hit our TVs, the whole conspiracy theory part of WK's narrative had been forgotten. Instead, we got the goofy party dude narrative, the 15 minutes of fame, and then promptly forgetting his existence because a new Bum Fights DVD had just dropped on LimeWire or whatever early 2000s nonsense we were getting up to. It wasn't until years later, in 2004, when Americans became aware of the conspiracy of too many WKs. During a December 18th concert in New Jersey, fans noticed that the person performing on stage was not Andrew WK. He had the signature long hair and dirty all-white clothes, but it was a completely different person, potentially wearing a wig. They began to loudly complain and point out that the man singing on stage was an imposter. Halfway through the show, the fake Andrew WK abruptly left the stage and the rest of the show was canceled. Angry, confused fans called into the radio station that hosted the show for weeks, asking what had happened and who the man on stage was. But nobody was ever able to answer those questions. This was when the world, or at least the portion of the world that was still paying attention to Andrew WK, was introduced to Steev Mike. S-T-E-E-V Mike. So, who was he? Well, officially, Steev Mike had been listed as the executive producer on I Get Wet. But who is Steev Mike? Some people believe that Steev Mike is actually the name of a collective of artists who created and engineered the Andrew WK persona. Some people believe it's Dave Grohl. Others believe it's actually Andrew WK himself. But before we talk about who Steev Mike is, let's talk about how everyone became aware of his existence. We'll call this next section of strange digital missives the Steev Mike incident. 2 years after I Get Wet came out and simultaneously exhilarated and confused us, WK released his second album, The Wolf. WK had claimed in later interviews that the material for I Get Wet and The Wolf were all recorded at the same time, but this second album is much more laid back than the first. The lyrics are much less foreboding and dystopian. They give shades of WK's motivational speaker future. This is the album WK was touring during that fateful 2004 New Jersey show where fans claimed an imposter was performing on stage. But one of the details that slipped past fans about WK's sophomore effort, much more notable than the slight shift in mood and tone of the first, was that there was a name missing from the liner notes. This album, despite having supposedly been recorded at the exact same time as I Get Wet, did not feature an executive producer credit for Steev Mike. In response to the major backlash and confusion from fans about that show, a supposed member of WK's team, Christine Williams, the person who ran all of his websites, held an online Q&A. There were 191 questions that were answered during the Q&A. Here are just a couple of the more significant ones. All the legwork of finding and curating the various quotes and posts that I'm about to read was all done by Michael Nelson in his article on Stereogum from 2018, because that is literally the only source I can find for any of this stuff. So, thanks, Michael. Question. Hey, a lot of people don't seem to think that was Andrew WK at the NJ show. I'm one of them. What's going on, Christine? Answer. To answer all your questions, there's been a lot of confusion regarding this New Jersey concert. People have been especially curious about where Andrew went after the show and whether or not it was in fact Andrew himself on the stage. Well, please let me be the first to tell you that you can all take a deep breath and relax. Many of you did mention some strange, unexplained moments during the evening, mainly due to the stopping of the show early, before the band could finish the intended set, and how Andrew was moving. This was due to a small problem with people in the backstage. Everything was taken care of smoothly and everyone made it out in one piece. At this point, all we can do is look at the information that we've been collecting and continue with our research into the facts. We will not respond to false accusations, nor will we be threatened by those who choose deceptiveness over fairness. Question: Yo, Christine! Where the heck is Andrew? We don't want to hear from you, we want to hear from Mr. WK himself! Bring back Andrew WK! Answer: I must admit, I feel slightly uneasy trying to explain to you where Andrew is, and let me also state for the record that I am in no way trying to fill in for Andrew. As Andrew himself has stated, he will always be there. You just might not see him. You must know that Andrew is not moving away because he's already gone, which means he's actually closer to you than ever before. And they're all pretty much as vague and dodgy as that. The whole thing came off as this weird, purposely confusing PR stunt, but that wasn't the end. Users had always been allowed to submit questions to WK through one of his websites, awkworld.com. Typically, the responses to the questions would end up being these generic words of encouragement. It gets betterisms and generic motivational speeches, the kind of stuff that WK would become known for later on. However, after this Q&A happened, the answers to the questions started getting bizarre and menacing. Real people would write into the website asking for basic advice on things like relationships and dealing with a bully at work. And they'd get eerie, cryptic responses that felt similar to the apocalyptic lyrics on I Get Wet. Eventually, the messages started incorporating a coded system with hidden messages spelled out in numbers. As explained in the Andrew WK and Steev Mike information page, a living, breathing manifesto on the conspiracy and deeper meaning behind Steev Mike, supposedly meticulously researched and written by an Andrew WK superfan, the code is a series of numbers and symbols in parentheses. It required the reader to take each number to match it to a corresponding letter in the alphabet. For example, A equals 1, B equals 2, C equals 3, and so on. So a simple message would read 19, 20, 5, 5, 22, 13, 9, 11, 5, which translates into Steev Mike. For several days on awkworld.com, there was post after post in the fan question section with dozens of coded messages all referencing Steev Mike. Eventually, they started getting more specific and more ominous. Now it's time for Steev Mike, and then he left. Who knows? I promise, this party never stops. I'm going to be around, just not where the music doesn't sound out loud. Everything I have goes into this music. With my compliments, Andrew WK. 1. Not only am I okay, I've never felt better. 3. Please experience sensations identical to the antithesis of fear. I've begun the synthesis of your fantasies yet undreamt. The coded messages go on and on. There could literally be not one, but several more videos specifically dedicated to deciphering the coded messages and their meanings that appeared on awkworld.com over the course of these few weeks. Instead, let's mention two last details of the coded messages. First, as we mentioned before, the numerical code for Steev Mike is 19, 20, 5, 5, 22, 13, 9, 11, 5. In this code, the numbers 5 and 5 appear next to each other and are translated into the EE in Steev Mike. The number 55 then goes on to be used throughout the coded messages as a kind of shorthand for Steev Mike. 55 is Steev Mike. Remember that number, as it'll come up later. Second, this was the final coded message to appear on awkworld.com. Dear Andrew WK, to start, let me say that I respect you and your fans very much. You know how much I believe in you and all that you stand for, because I stood for it first. You know how much I love your music because I created it. You know that I love the way you look and act and sing and dance because it was born in my brain. Hopefully by now you've noticed that I've hacked into the websites. Maybe you haven't seen everything, but our fans have. In fact, your fans are well on their way to knowing the truth. You've exploited the automatic disadvantage our agreement puts me in. My choice to let you enjoy the spotlight while I create the magic leaves me almost helpless. Our fans deserve to know the truth. Our fans are smart, but if you refuse to comply, I will have no choice but to reveal myself and reveal you as a backstabbing fraud. It's your choice. Yours truly, Steev Mike. After a few days, the message was deleted and replaced by one that was supposedly by the actual Andrew WK or a member of his team attempting damage control. The message reads, Dear everyone, I had no idea what was waiting. I got back to my room. I noticed I had changed. Oh no. Already I didn't like the sound of that. Geez. I just can't believe this actually happened. I can't believe I'm here. I can't believe it. This whole Steev Mike thing. I can't even begin. Please don't believe Steev Mike. I used to call myself Steev Mike a long time ago and it's nothing now. Someone is trying to confuse you and make me look bad. We're stronger now, more than ever, and it's only because of one thing. We're still going. Long time. Sincerely, Andrew WK. Shortly afterward, a new FAQ was added to the site. Question: is Andrew WK dead? Answer: no. Andrew WK is alive and well. Question: who is Steev Mike? Answer: Steev Mike is the executive producer and creative director for the Andrew WK albums I Get Wet and The Wolf. Steev Mike's contributions to Andrew WK Inc. and Andrew WK personally have proved incredibly effective, and for this reason, Steev Mike has always been well regarded within the organization. Question: did Steev Mike hack into the Andrew WK websites? Answer: due to circumstances beyond our control, we are unable to comment at this time. And then later on that year, a post popped up in the news section of awkworld.com announcing a new Andrew WK album, a follow-up to The Wolf. New Andrew WK album. Andrew WK is deep in the midst of recording the third full-length album, The Power Never Stops Forming. The new songs are building to an even higher level of power and exaltation. However, this was not true. WK went completely silent for the entirety of 2005, and The Power Never Stops Forming never came out. It was just a weird, ominous dead end. During 2005, several weird and cryptic websites sprung up about Andrew WK, such as the aforementioned Andrew WK and Steev Mike information page. Throughout the year, 50 to 80 websites were launched, all filled with cryptic, labyrinthian, impossible to interpret information and theories, supposedly strung together by a random fan. It's not exactly clear who truly made these websites, but it's likely that they were all actually created by WK and his team as some kind of weird metatextual subterfuge. Most of the websites, unfortunately, don't exist anymore, but a handful of them are still up. It was around this time in late 2005 and early 2006 that another rumor started spreading. Not only was Andrew WK a manufactured hoax created by a committee of anonymous artists, or Dave Grohl, or Tom Cruise in the Church of Scientology, and yes, that's one of the real theories. But he wasn't even consistently the same person. Andrew WK was a costume, a moniker, and he had been played by multiple different actors. The Andrew WK from his early appearances in music videos for songs from I Get Wet, concerts, and late night shows was not the same current Andrew WK. At some point, he had been replaced by someone else, or perhaps many different actors were constantly being cycled out of the role. And honestly, it's kind of understandable why people thought that. Throughout WK's career, from the early 2000s all the way up to today, he has maintained this almost frustrating level of physical transformation. He appears in interviews, randomly oscillating between his signature scruffy facial hair to a clean-shaven look, yo-yos in weight and muscle mass, sometimes appearing as a rail-thin kid with very little meat on his bones, and sometimes as a, yoked out professional wrestler looking dude. He'll sometimes go through periods of exclusively wearing these dark wraparound sunglasses in interviews, and there are even several interviews and appearances where he's obviously wearing a wig. WK has been so evasive in committing to a solid set of logistical rules for his physical appearance that it's almost impossible to nail down exactly what he even looks like. But it's not just the physical appearance. From interview to interview, appearance to appearance, WK will often entirely transform his whole personality, his body language, his mannerisms, his vocal inflections, and even his voice. There are several moments caught on camera where WK just is a different person. Even if it's not literally a different person dressed up and posing as WK, it's a different, completely unrecognizable person claiming to be WK. It doesn't help that there are images of WK that have clearly been doctored to alter his physical appearance that were obviously released by WK and his team specifically to spread this belief. These are official images posted on many of WK's various social media and websites where his face has been changed to look like a whole different person. Interestingly, in these photos, he always seems to give himself crossed eyes for some reason. And that's just the thing. As you wade through all these websites, bizarre Q&As, doctored photos, and conspiracy theories, it's all very obvious if you're paying attention that it's literally just Andrew WK himself creating and releasing all of this. The year is 2025, and going back year by year, you can see a person intentionally trying to build a strange, science fiction tinged mythology around himself, while also trying to make it seem like it's something somebody else is spreading about him, or they're possibly true. He doesn't want anybody to be fully sure. Here are a few examples of the way that WK will wildly shift his entire personality and physicality in various public appearances throughout his career. You can see how the casual observer might easily assume that these are completely different people dressed up as Andrew WK. But if you look closely and pay attention, they're all him. The man is just genuinely a savant of physical transformation. It's not common to see somebody commit so thoroughly to gaining and losing weight and muscle mass, changing their entire body language, and altering their very personality in such a short span of time. The public meltdown nobody noticed. After taking 2005 off, in 2006, WK finally entered into the next stage in his career. Motivational speaking for some reason. He began touring the country, appearing at venues, and giving his strange brand of nihilism wrapped in generic motivational platitudes. Gone was the carefree party dude. WK had become this saccharine, upbeat, giant teddy bear-esque figure. A cuddly and overly optimistic beacon of positivity that could spin any situation, any narrative, into something hopeful. He also released his third album, Close Calls with Brick Walls, exclusively in Korea and Japan. In a later interview, WK would eventually explain why the album only came out in those regions at the time. At the end of 2004, an old friend of mine got in some business trouble and basically decided to take it out on me. To cut a long story short, this person is someone I worked very closely with and had a formal and family business relationship with. Due to various complaints this person had with me, they were able to turn my life and career upside down. I wasn't allowed to use my own name within certain areas of the US and entertainment industry, and we were in a debate about who owned the rights to my image and who could get credit for, quote, inventing it. Now, there were two distinctive details about Close Calls. Number one, inexplicably, Steve Mike was once again credited as executive producer on the album. And second, it had returned to the unsettling uncanniness of I Get Wet. As one review of the album at the time said, I found Close Calls with Brick Walls and especially the associated non-musical ephemera, art, videos, websites, theories, performances, interviews, extremely disturbing. It's Lynch-like in that it suggests the presence of something awful, some terrible psychological disturbance or rupture, without ever really describing it directly. It has the sickening, trypophobic gravity of a good wingnut conspiracy theory, where everything starts to seem like an uncoded clue after a while, but the solution remains forever out of reach. Then, sometime in early 2007, Andrew was doing a public speaking engagement in Seattle that was attended by Eric Grandy, a writer for The Stranger. After the event, Grandy wrote a blog post questioning whether the man who had spoken on stage was actually Andrew WK or not. He claimed that he had never even heard of the conspiracy theory or any of the bizarre events surrounding WK, but that he didn't believe that the speaker was actually WK. In response to this blog post, Grandy got a doozy of a response from an anonymous commenter. The truth will make you sad. Mike Steve is AWK. Andrew WK is Steve Mike, and vice versa. The whole Steve Mike created Andrew concept, the website hacking, the actor angle, the Andrew WK Inc. company, Louise Harland, etc., all were designed and orchestrated by Andrew and his management company as a bit of, quote, social experiment and a way of keeping the fan base wondering about it all during his relative absence from the spotlight. The wealth of information available, quote, evidence to the contrary, etc., 35 to 45% of it was pre-written and planned in the correct places. The rest of it simply boils down to overzealous fans coming up with their own scenarios and passing them along to other fans. Part of you wants to believe that this is the cut and dry answer to the entire thing. However, more likely, and yes, it is strange to be defaulting to the fringe conspiracy theory as the more likely explanation, but has anything you've heard thus far given you any indication that the simplest answer would be the truest when it comes to this story? It was actually Andrew WK himself that left this message. Why? Well, largely because of what happened next. On September 19th of 2008, WK booked one of his speaking engagements at London's Madame Jojo's. The evening was billed as a one-off stream of consciousness addressed to an intimate audience, but otherwise nobody knew what was going to happen. There used to be video footage of this event, but it literally doesn't exist anymore except for a couple of short clips that were put into other videos. However, from the short snippets that still exist, we see an Andrew WK that we've never seen before. One that has never been captured on camera except for a few rare occasions. In the footage, WK is seen standing on stage completely stripped of anything recognizable about Andrew WK. His hair is short, about ear length, and it's slicked back. His face is clean shaven and he's much skinnier and less muscle toned than he's ever been. Instead of his signature white on white t-shirt, jeans, and high top sneakers, he's wearing a white silk button-up shirt tucked into slacks with brown dress shoes. He legitimately looks like an entirely different person. If this is how WK looked when Eric Grandy of The Strangers saw him speak, it's no wonder he questioned whether it was actually him or not. It is difficult to fully stress how completely different he looks. You wouldn't know this was the same person as the long-haired party rocker unless you were told. And while full-length footage of the talk no longer exists, here's a transcript of the bomb he dropped on the audience that night. I want to confess something to all of you. I'm actually not Andrew WK. I'm not the same guy that you may have seen from the I Get Wet album. I'm not that same person. And I just don't mean that in a philosophical or conceptual way. It's not the same person at all. Do I look like the same person? What I mean is that since that time, I have changed. And for many of you that happened to be there during that time, perhaps you have changed as well. And I would like to think that we're not the same people at all. And again, not just conceptually, but very literally. Andrew WK was created by a large group of people. They met, and I was there. And we talked about how we could come up with something that would move people. I was auditioned, alongside many other people, to fill this role of a great frontman or a great performer. I'm the next person who is playing Andrew WK. Interestingly enough, there seems to be only one other shred of footage that exists on the internet showing WK during this time period with the shorter, slick back hair, button-up shirt, and slacks. It was an appearance on the YouTube web series What's in My Bag from Amoeba Records in Hollywood, California. A show where cameras follow around a musician or actor or artist as they shop for music and movies in the store and show you what they're buying. WK appeared in the video, once again, unrecognizable physically, but also completely transformed personality, body language, and voice-wise. He might as well be a different person. And it really takes comparing screenshots from this and other images of WK and studying them closely to recognize similarities in the facial structure that reassure that this actually even is the same person at all. As you watch the episode, you can imagine the entire crew for the show silently wondering who the hell this guy is and how their attempt to have a fun, gimmicky shoot with the goofy party dude they saw on MTV somehow turned into a David Lynch film? For WK, it seems like any appearance on any show, web series, interview platform, etc. is just another opportunity to further his bizarre narrative. It's all world building for him. For instance, take a look at this other clip of an interview he did on Vice where he's wearing a wig. 100% he's just wearing a wig. And also, he's just a different person. He seems like he is someone who's being forced to dress up like Andrew WK and pretend to be him and is just not trying at all.
If we take party to mean the most pleasurable active experience, I picked that word because it was very universal and also very particular. Yeah, but there's a blankness to it. We've been talking about contradiction. The thoughtfulness that you commented on, and me personally, up against this apparently thoughtless music or content or lyrical content, is all to create that in-between space, that paradox, that contradiction that keeps the thought in between without it being able to rest on one certain side or the other.
So that's it then, right? Question answered. We now know the true reality of Andrew WK. Well, not quite. A couple months later, after this confession leaked onto the internet, WK released this statement on his website. Since 2001, I have been accused of being part of a conspiracy in which I knowingly entered into a contract with creative directors who proceeded to invent a new identity for me to perform under. I'm here to say that this is simply not true and a gross exaggeration of easily explainable and commonplace music industry practices. Of course I work with people who choose not to include their whole names in the credits or who are on stage with me. But taking advice and guidance from other people doesn't mean I'm the victim of mind control. The kind of people who accuse Andrew WK of being a talking head for some secret conspiracy for corrupt people's morals are the same people who claim MTV and Cartoon Network are owned by secret rulers of the world out to poison kids' brains, or that pop stars like Beyonce or Lady Gaga are part of some occult society, or that companies like McDonald's, Coca-Cola, or Hollywood are secretly promoting hidden plans. Or that the president of the USA is just a figurehead and reading a script given to him by a secret world power. Just because I work with other people who advise me doesn't mean that I am a puppet for an evil cult or have some sort of master plan. It has become too common for musical artists and performers to be labeled as part of some global scam to control the world. And he also posted this video on the site as well.
Hello, this is Andrew WK. I want to start by saying Happy New Year to everyone. I'm very grateful for the excitement that the new year promises to bring us all. And I would like to once again say that I am a real person and that Andrew WK has always been. Would like to encourage everyone to ignore with great passion these different statements saying otherwise.
And it's worth noting that by the time he released this video, he had already regrown his signature long hair and beard and was back to rocking the white on white look and the kind of buff pro wrestler dude persona. So, back to square one. It's been years of protracted weirdness and we're still not any closer to understanding if Andrew WK is a real person or just who the hell Steve Mike is. And, ladies and germs, spoiler alert, things aren't going to get any clearer. In August of 2009, WK performed at the annual Gathering of the Juggalos in a completely stripped down set that was literally just him standing on stage singing to a backing track. No band, no larger-than-life party persona. In fact, the whole thing seemed to be an elaborate troll. WK dances around on stage, frenetically singing to his backing track while the audience gets increasingly angry and annoyed by the absurdity of what they're seeing. They eventually start throwing glass bottles at him, to which he gleefully dodges and skips around with a wry smirk on his face. Like Andy Kaufman before him, he secretly loves being the heel and playing the bad guy. In September of 2009, WK released his fourth album, or fifth if you count the fact that Close Calls with Brick Walls was originally released in Japan and Korea as a double album with another full-length LP titled Mother of Mankind, an album that wasn't released in the US until 2012, making it the official fifth album in the US. There were two notable things about this album. Number one, it was an album composed entirely of improvisational new age piano music with no singing whatsoever. And number two, it was titled 55 Cadillac. And now we want the boys and girls at home to take out their decoder rings and think back to earlier in the video. What number did we want you to remember? 55. The number in those early coded messages on WK's website. The numbers that stood for EE, but were shorthand for Steve Mike. Upon releasing 55 Cadillac, WK published a piece in The Guardian, where he had a weekly column at the time, explaining the meaning and purpose behind releasing the album. The name of the article was, I Am Finally a Free Man. Hello, I hope you're well. I recently released an album called 55 Cadillac. The Guardian asked me to write about it here. They requested I explain why I made the album and why it contains only improvised piano pieces. Here's what I'm able to say. At the end of 2004, an old friend of mine got in some business trouble and basically decided to take it out on me. To cut a long story short, this person is someone I worked with very closely and had a formal and family business relationship with. Due to various complaints this person had with me, they were able to turn my life and career upside down. I wasn't allowed to use my own name within certain areas of the US entertainment industry, and we were in a debate about who owned the rights to my image and who could get credit for inventing it. This has made my life complicated and intense for a few years, but I kept working and doing whatever I could to keep moving forward. By 2008, after a lot of negotiating, my new business team and I had to come to an agreement with my opponent, and I was finally in the clear. That's how this new 55 Cadillac album became possible. We based the new record label in the UK, so there were no issues within the US. However, as of last week, we've been partially pulled back into the thick of it, and I'm getting hourly updates from my lawyer as I type this. This was the first chance in almost 10 years where I was allowed to simply play and record an instrument. No songwriters, no lyrics to learn, no overdubs, no slow fixes, no remixes, no video shoots or interview practices, just the sound of someone sitting in a room playing piano for the sake of it. Just a huge black piano and a huge black car. He's openly crafting the narrative. This article basically takes every conspiracy theory ever devised about Andrew WK and Steve Mike and rolls them all into one. He calls out every one of them as if they're all simultaneously true. In January of 2010, it was finally announced that Close Calls with Brick Walls would be released in the US, 4 years after the initial release in Korea and Japan. When discussing how he was able to finally solve the legal disputes preventing him from releasing music stateside, WK explained that he had to come to an agreement with the vague, unknown entities blocking him from using his persona and name in the US. In one particular interview on rocksound.tv from the time, he explained that he and his management team had figured out a way to get around the legal roadblocks preventing him from releasing Andrew WK music in the US. They created a record label, Skyscraper Music Maker, and headquartered it in London. In this way, they were able to get free of the legal stipulations keeping them from releasing music in the United States. However, and we'll just quote the interview here because the structure of this reveal cannot be paraphrased. However, after I put out 55 Cadillac, it was seen that I'd released this record and gone to great lengths to set up this label in London so that the album could be imported to every other country. It didn't exactly work as, I don't want to say hoped, but maybe as we had thought initially. Nevertheless, we then negotiated and now we can do it. It's a great thing. We've got to change the name of the label, but it's a very exciting thing for me to be able to release not only Close Calls with Brick Walls, but this entire other album of material that I never thought would ever get heard. What if you change the name of the record label to? Skyscraper Music Maker is the name of the label that released 55 Cadillac. So that's the same. What happened was, and it all comes down to credit, when we released 55 Cadillac, certain people weren't credited because they weren't involved with the recording. As I said, that was the first album I made completely on my own. It had been in my mind for years to release a piano album. What ended up happening, based on the contracts and various decisions we made over the years, the people who weren't being given credit had to be given credit. An easy way for them to get credit is for them to have their name on the label. That way, whatever I put out, they automatically receive credit for. After WK dodges the question about what they've changed the name of the record label to, after the subject gets completely changed, and after several other unrelated interview questions, at the bottom of the article, in the footnote of the piece, the album Close Calls with Brick Walls, Mother of Mankind, is out on February 22nd on Steev Mike Records. And if you could somehow believe it, it legitimately got weirder from here. In February of 2010, WK did another long-form speaking engagement. This was in direct response to the original leaked speaking engagement he had done back in 2008 with the slicked back hair. He came on stage at the Santos Party House in New York City, a popular nightclub that he used to co-own before it shut down, to take any and all questions from the audience. Okay, let's just cut right to the chase with this one because we've been teasing out the ambiguity of this for the whole episode, and at this point, I think everybody understands what's happening here. This entire Q&A is openly performance art. Andrew WK gets on stage and declares that he will answer any question from any audience member, but then spends the next hour and a half dodging every single question in increasingly more elaborately ridiculous ways. At one point, he's asked if any Andrew WK music will ever be featured in a Rock Band or Guitar Hero game, and he answers by going into detail about the sexual chemistry between Vince Vaughn and Kristen Bell in the movie Couples Retreat. That's the vibe of this. Every time he's asked a real question about Steev Mike, he gets visibly nervous, stumbles over his words, takes long pauses and comically protracted drinks from his water, and sometimes just runs off stage and goes to the bathroom. And he also keeps reading off of papers in front of him in a robotic voice as if he's reciting approved messaging from a board of trustees. This is his masterstroke. The culmination of a decade of creating this character that perfectly encapsulates the manufactured and mass-produced persona of a modern celebrity. Here are a few notable moments from the Q&A. For me, it's become something rather stressful, only because I'm the person that's on the stage. Only because I'm the person that's been in the light. Only because I'm the person that's been given the voice. But that's something I agreed to. I signed up for a long time ago, and I'm prepared to handle the responsibilities, the ramifications of this position. Everybody here must have had parents, so you're here, you're the product of some kind of life force, and I am as well. I guess the difference potentially between you and I is that the people that were involved in making me exist in a physical form were also involved in making me exist in a philosophical or literal form, in every other form other than physical. And that was it for a long time. This Q&A seemed to be the culmination of a decade of something, because after this, the looming specter of Steev Mike faded into the background. He did continue to make music, continue to speak at events about the strength of willpower or whatever. He became the host of a live-action reality TV show on Cartoon Network called Destroy, Build, Destroy, where a team of kids blow up some random machine, have to figure out how to rebuild it, and then blow it up again. Yeah, you remember that? And then he hosted his own talk show on Glenn Beck's The Blaze TV network. under the auspices of some kind of weird all walks of life should come together and hear each other out, vague centrist crap. But he seemed to lose interest in the elaborate meta-examination of duality of persona that was Andrew WK and Steve Mike. Either that or the shadowy group of artists that control them did, or maybe Tom Cruise did, or maybe the Pope did, or maybe Satan did, or maybe it was still happening. Maybe Andrew WK's 2010s phase of getting buff and appearing on interview shows, barking about personal motivation like some kind of cult leader, Macho Man Randy Savage guy, and tweeting party tips on social media was just the next phase in the examination. But despite all these years of what was obviously some kind of elaborate personal world building, nobody seemed to ever actually talk about it. He just kind of did all this stuff. But if you ever brought up Andrew WK, people would either say, that party guy? Or they'd talk about what a great, positive, motivational dude he was. Maybe intentionally, or maybe unintentionally, all this weird, sinister feeling stuff just went unnoticed. This happened for a combination of 4 factors, I believe. First off, after the initial success of the Party Hard singles in 2001, a majority of people entirely just stopped caring about Andrew WK. He was forever solidified as the party guy in their hearts and minds, and that's the extent of what they know about him. So most people simply just aren't paying attention to any of this. They have lives, I guess. The second reason is that the fan base that WK has built over the years might be modest, but they are intensely passionate. And also, for some reason, incredibly emotionally invested in this nice guy, motivational speaker persona he's built up, totally unwilling to see him in any other light. So if you ever bring up any of this talk about his persona being a weird performance art experiment on the internet, you will literally get hundreds of people jumping down your throat, regaling you with personal anecdotes about how they met him at a concert once and he's the nicest guy on the planet or whatever, and how all the conspiracy talk is just total BS. Trust me, a person who has spent the last 5 years researching, discussing, and speaking about this topic, if you bring up Andrew WK's fictional life on the internet, you will get a hostile reaction. Just look at the comment section of this video. The third is more subtle, but I think that in the beginning, when Andrew WK was first devising this grand satirical experiment, he knew that if he made his character too different from his actual self, it had become increasingly more difficult and inconvenient to be on all the time while out in public, performing at concerts, meeting fans after the show, or even just bumping into them at the grocery store. He had to craft a character that was, in some ways, overlapped with his actual self so that he could, in these long stretches between these big narrative moments, relax and be less locked in without totally ruining the illusion. It's the reason why he can go on to WTF with Mark Maron, for example, and simultaneously tell true, deeply personal stories about his marriage right alongside an elaborate fictional plot point in this theater of the absurd, because he allowed the two halves of himself to intermix until it was impossible to distinguish between them so that he could be in character 24/7 for his whole life. He created an uncanny valley of self, and in this valley, people become confused and reject information that conflicts with what they want to believe. And those fans who meet him at concerts are meeting a genuinely nice guy, because I guess that's just what Andrew WK actually is in real life. The fourth and final factor was extremely calculated by WK himself, and it's that he's cleverly and very purposely conflated the real conspiracy about what he's doing with the fictional conspiracies. If you ever bring up the idea that Andrew WK is a fictional character, people who are in the know will roll their eyes and say that all that talk about him being played by multiple actors and the shadowy cabals or whatever is total nonsense. You'll then have to patiently walk through and explain that, no, I'm not talking about that conspiracy theory. I'm talking about the other conspiracy theory that is actually true. And then you end up just looking crazier than you did before, which is quite possibly what's happening throughout this entire video. And you're already operating from a baseline of people thinking you're crazy because Andrew WK has so thoroughly confused the unrealistic science fiction storyline he created with the real details of this performance art experiment that he's doing. Andrew WK was an early pioneer of a post-truth world, and the strategy of overwhelming the senses with oversaturation of conflicting and insane information that we see today as a tactic was his Missouri River. And he was like the Lewis and Clark, but they're wearing wigs for some reason. Crafting your own non-existence. In 2018, he released another album called You're Not Alone that was completely free of any of the subliminal Steve Mike stuff. It was the musical equivalent of his public personality as an overly jacked, sickeningly positive motivational speaker. Every song was a saccharine ode to staying optimistic, loving yourself, letting music heal your life, and partying hard. All of his tours and public interviews mirrored this message. He started tweeting daily generic platitudes on Twitter. Honestly, the vibe shift was kinda jarring. How was the same dude who a decade ago was singing songs full of ominous and deranged preludes to the apocalypse and putting on experimental immersive theater in his nightclub now just this generically happy Tony Robbins type guy? Like, what happened? Well, that's what we wanted to know in the summer of 2020 when we did a 4-hour episode of our podcast, Deep Cuts, about Andrew WK. We had just started the show a few months prior and only had about 150 weekly listeners. The Andrew WK episode was our first big hit, and from there the show just grew, and we carved out a modest little audience of our own. And the Andrew WK episode was and still remains one of our most popular. But to be honest, there wasn't much of an ending to it. It seemed like WK's decade-long experiment had just kind of petered out, and so we didn't have any answers. We even tried to reach out to WK through various channels multiple times. Maybe we could interview him. Maybe we could coax a little bit more of that strangeness out of him and capture a new advancement in the storyline. Maybe Steve Mike would make an appearance. We never got a response. But then, a year later, in 2021, something interesting happened. Andrew WK announced a new album titled God is Partying and released a series of new singles with accompanying music videos. 3 new songs, Babylon, Everybody Sins, and I'm in Heaven, which in retrospect feels like it was meant to be a literal statement rather than some kind of abstract concept, were released with music videos on the Napalm Records YouTube channel. But there was something different. The most notable, WK had once again massively altered his physical appearance since the last time anybody had seen him publicly. He was no longer the buff, meathead-looking guy he had been all throughout the early 2010s. He was now slim, lean, and postured in a much more refined and almost intellectual way. The other thing was, the Steve Mike stuff was definitely back, and seemingly more ramped up than it had ever been before. The music videos for the 3 new singles were filled with bizarre, surreal, often disturbing imagery. A running theme throughout all of them seemed to be that WK was being controlled by some shadowy, just out of frame corporate entity that was holding him under duress and forcing him to perform. Which sounds familiar after everything we just talked about. He also started dating Two Broke Girls actress Kat Dennings after quietly announcing a divorce from his previous wife and former bandmate Cherry Lilly, despite ironically not being able to stop gushing about her in interviews only a year prior, and started regularly appearing in her social media posts on Instagram. At least once a day, you could check in with Dennings and see a photo of her hanging out with WK doing just normal couple stuff. The most striking thing about these photos, Andrew WK wasn't wearing his signature white-on-white costume. He was dressed in cooler blues and sharp blacks. His slimmer physique and clean-shaven face were more reminiscent of a flashy Hollywood pretty boy than a stoner party god. And the whole thing seemed pretty innocent until you leaned in a bit closer and all the details came into focus. He's made reference to something sinister over the years during his random rants on website blogs, and in 2021, that sinister message made a return. In the weeks leading up to the release of God is Partying, his social media post abruptly shifted from the vaguely motivational brain rot to cryptic messages about being controlled by an evil entity, of his body being literally taken over by someone else, somebody who had controlled him in the past. And then it all made sense. The man in those photos gallivanting across Los Angeles with his new Hollywood starlet girlfriend was not Andrew WK. It was Steve Mike. He'd finally gained full control of Andrew WK's body. Steve Mike was Andrew WK, or rather some dark entity that lived inside of him and was fighting for control of the ship. The process that WK had begun 20 years ago was almost complete. The storyline was coming out of hibernation, and it was all going to conclude once and for all. And we need to pause here for a moment because it bears repeating, since a large chunk of WK's experiment involves blurring the lines between reality and fiction so that anybody who talks about any aspect of it is conflated with a crazy conspiracy nut. I don't actually believe this stuff is literally true. I'm saying this is the strange live-action role-playing game narrative that Andrew WK is crafting for anybody who cares to pay attention, which is apparently just me. Over the next few weeks, WK started having what can only be described as a prolonged public meltdown on social media. His Twitter and Instagram pages radically transformed from his daily motivational postings to a frenetic combination of links to his new music videos, countdowns to the album release, and disturbing stream of consciousness rants. One day, WK would make a flurry of posts, cryptically alluding to the fact that he was being held hostage by an evil group of shadowy figures. And then the next day, he would post oddly formal statements claiming that he'd been hacked or wasn't feeling well the previous day, and that's why he had posted these strange messages. It was all obviously a PR stunt to try and drive interest in the album. He was world building again, trying to craft a narrative where he was being controlled by some secret musical Illuminati, but then he'd go rogue and try to tell the world, only for them to rein him back in and force him to do damage control. Classic conspiratorial stuff. But it also seemed like it was building to the end of something. Otherwise, why would he return to all this conspiratorial lore after a full decade of just kind of being a regular guy playing regular music? Eventually, something else happened during this period in mid-2021. In between his bizarre social media rants, an alleged scanned copy of one of Andrew WK's journals that was purported to be something he created back in 1999 when he was working on I Get Wet was leaked onto the internet. The journal entries are oddly prescient, with things written in them accurately alluding to things he was currently doing, as if he had predicted and planned the events of 2021 over 20 years ago. The journals meticulously described how he planned to craft a rock star persona, create an iconic costume, become famous, and then destroy himself for all the world to see. The journal was supposedly leaked by some anonymous whistleblower, but it's pretty clear at this point that this was something that Andrew WK made himself recently and posted. The journal's predictions about the next 20 years of WK's career were just way too uncanny for it to have been authentic. But still, what was all this talk about him publicly destroying himself? This clearly had some kind of thematic significance in the grander story being woven here. Well, to address this, there's a quote from one of WK's alleged high school friends that is recorded in the Andrew WK and Steve Mike information page that seeks to explain this. One day in the acting class, the teacher had us all stand up and talk about what our dreams for the future were. Most of the kids said to be a famous actor. One other girl said to be a star on Broadway, and I said to make movies. Andrew went last and stood up and said, very slowly, "I want to craft my own non-existence." The teacher asked him what he meant, and he said exactly what I said. The teacher was clearly annoyed, and the whole class rolled its eyes because Andrew was always saying weird stuff that made no sense. I thought what he said sounded cool though, so after class, while we were walking to our cars, I asked Andrew how he was going to craft his own non-existence. I don't remember what he said word for word, but essentially he said, "First, I'm going to make myself undeniably exist as a recognizable and identifiable form. And then I'm going to spend the rest of my life working to eliminate it and prove that its existence was an impossible illusion all along. But because people have already seen it, they will experience the sensation equal to maximum pleasure." Crafting his own non-existence, huh? Surely that couldn't be what all this is leading up to. Well, as the release of God is Partying drew close, WK's social media rants became increasingly more unhinged and more frequent, to the point where he'd make upwards of 20 posts in a row on Twitter within the span of a few hours. And then, dear viewer, one of the coolest things that's ever happened to me occurred. One day, Andrew WK started ranting on Twitter and Instagram about how some people think he's not a real person, and how all of the rumors about him being a fake character were lies being spread by evil forces in the world. And then he started sharing links to various videos and articles of people accusing him of not being real. For each link, he'd post it on Twitter, share it to his Instagram story, and write some incoherent rant about what a liar the people making the claims were. And during this particular meltdown, Andrew WK posted a link to our episode about him. In his post, along with a link to our episode, he called what we said total bullshit. We had officially become characters in the grand tapestry that Andrew WK was weaving. We were officially canon bad guys in the Andrew WK storyline that I'd spent months researching and writing about and years following. But where was it all going? Well, on September 10th of 2021, God is Partying was released. The cover of the album depicts Andrew WK's corpse, dressed in his signature costume, caked in mud and filth, stone dead in the gutter of a neighborhood street. This cover serves as a sharp contrast to that of his previous album, You're Not Alone, where he stands defiant, almost Messiah-like, on a similar neighborhood street, perhaps even the same one, surrounded by creeping darkness that he is seemingly staving off with just the intensity of his gaze. Behind him is a colorful swirl of stars in the night sky, giving the impression of a hopeful, heavenly warmth all around him. The cover of You're Not Alone conveys optimism, a fight to survive, positivity and determination in the face of evil. The cover of God is Partying shows Andrew WK having gruesomely lost that battle. Days after the release of God is Partying, Andrew WK deleted all of his social media and almost every one of his various websites. Every single post he had ever made anywhere on the internet was just completely gone. It's the reason why we haven't really been able to show any of it to you here other than the screenshot we took about the post about us, because we just didn't have the forethought to screenshot this stuff. Kat Dennings even stopped publicly posting pictures of him. He literally disappeared from the world after releasing an album that, through its cover, its music videos, and the titles and lyrical content of many of its songs, strongly implied that he was dead. The only thing that remained up was the main website, andrewwk.com, where you can simply buy a handful of his merch. He crafted his own non-existence, just like he said he was going to. And he hasn't been back. He's never returned to social media. He canceled his 2022 tour and completely stopped performing live. Dennings doesn't even post about him anymore. The only indication that they're still together, let alone that he is alive and well, was a quiet announcement on her personal Facebook page a few years ago that they had gotten married and had a small 15-person ceremony, which, good for them. How involved was she with this whole thing? Where is the line between real life and the storyline? Clearly she was involved in some way, considering the timing of her suddenly posting pictures with him constantly and then out of nowhere no longer even acknowledging his existence. Was it a coincidence? Did she agree to be a part of her new boyfriend's elaborate performance art? I've got to admit, for a time, while I was deep in the rabbit hole of this story, I briefly considered the possibility that they weren't even actually together and she was just cast to play a role in this whole bizarre public spectacle. I don't actually think that's true now, but for maybe a day or two, I definitely considered it. But apparently we'll never really know the true nature of what Andrew WK was or who Steev Mike is. At least we won't know the true details. Regardless of the trappings, I think one thing is abundantly true beyond a reasonable amount of doubt. Andrew WK is a fictional character that was created to explore metatextual concepts about personal existence in a society obsessed with the cult of personality and how the shrewd commerce of business strips away individual identity. There's just no way he's not after all the crazy kayfabe bullshit that went on for 25 years. The only actual questions are, how was he able to commit to it for so long after most people just stopped caring? And if he actually got what he wanted out of it? We just seemingly won't ever know those answers. What's so interesting and so mysterious about Andrew WK is not necessarily whether he's real or fake, but the lines between where the character ends and the person playing the character begins. In 2012, WK appeared on the aforementioned WTF podcast with Marc Maron, a sit-down interview show that usually centers around Maron cracking through a celebrity's exterior and getting them to be open, vulnerable, and honest about their personal lives. Listening to this episode is fascinating because there are moments when WK is clearly speaking about real, personal things from the human playing Andrew WK. He speaks eloquently about music he grew up loving, books he's read, people he knew as a kid, things you couldn't possibly make up unless WK is so devoted to this character that he became an expert on several subjects just so he could pretend to be interested in them for the benefit of interviews. But then these things are told alongside other things we know are elaborate lies incorporated into the mythology of Andrew WK. And the most fascinating thing, despite the fact that Maron's whole show is about being open and vulnerable and honest, and despite the fact that WK is, at least partially, at least part of the time, actively playing a fictional character pretending to answer questions with answers that are a part of the fictional mythology of a performance art character, the subject of Steev Mike or WK's authenticity never comes up once. It's as if Marin has never heard about it, or WK's publicity team specifically asked him not to breach the subject. So, what does it all mean? What was Andrew WK actually trying to say about persona and celebrity? Well, there's what WK himself has said about what he's trying to do with his influence. Ever since I was a teenager, I had a fantasy, however naive it may have been, of partying with people who had nothing to do with me. The intimidating athletes, the cool older guys, the popular and pretty girls, the computer and tech wizards. Even when they were mean or dismissive, it didn't make me hate them. It made me want to find a way to become friends with them. Maybe it was based on my insecurity, my need to be liked, or maybe just curiosity, but I had a dream that someday I could get all these random people in a room together, having fun and laughing and dancing with me, and all the superficial divisions and bad feelings would melt away and we'd just party. That became the main concept of my life's work, and the main reason I decided to devote my life to partying, with the hopes that someday I would look over at the person next to me and realize that we were both having the greatest time together despite having no rational reason to get along at all. However, we know that's total bullshit that he tried to retcon into his own narrative. He didn't become about this whole bringing people together through partying thing until around 2010. Before that, his music, his performances, and his subliminal messaging seemed to be loaded with nihilistic, almost hostile malice towards humanity. And remember the story about the girl in his high school that filed a restraining order against him after he wrote a creepy song about her and played it for the entire school? Well, at a certain point in the 2010s, WK wrote an article for his weekly Guardian column that gave an update on that. After my high school crush had taken out a juvenile restraining order on me, I followed the restrictions of my punishment and didn't try to call or see her. I had just pushed it deep inside me, and it was a matter of not letting it out. I got pretty good at controlling it, mainly by occupying myself entirely with Andrew WK. But one night, I saw her again, and all my pent-up feelings were let loose. Here's how it happened. On our first big US tour, we played every major city. When we played in Cleveland, Ohio, I heard a rumor that the girl was coming to the show. Of course, my heart skipped a beat and a lump formed in my throat. We played our concert and had a great show. After, I was signing autographs for the audience in the parking lot behind the venue, when all of a sudden, there she was. It was probably the most scared I've ever felt in my life. I don't know how to explain the feeling. It was a mixture of total terror and absolute happiness. She made me almost sick with lust. I tried to avoid looking at her as best I could, but it was extremely hard to resist. The whole experience was overwhelming, and I excused myself from the rest of the fans and basically ran to my tour bus. I wasn't quite 21 yet, which is when it ended. After trying to catch my breath and slowing my racing heart, I heard a knock on the door. It was her. I couldn't believe this was happening. What do I do? I had a choice. I could either ignore her knocking, like she had ignored my knocking all those years earlier, and just let this miracle moment pass, or I could muster up my courage and answer the door. Maybe now, because I was doing well with Andrew WK and having success, she would give me the time of day. I gave myself a big mental pep talk and answered the door. "Hello," I said. I could barely talk. My mouth was so dry and I was shaking with such force that the words were choppy. "Hello, Andrew," she said. I invited her onto the bus and into the private back lounge, where it could be just her and me. We made our way into the back of the tour bus and I closed the door behind us. I was shaking, sweating, and felt like I was about to puke. I'm sure she could tell, but she didn't say anything. Instead, she sat down next to me on the bench and looked into my eyes. "It's great to see you after all these years," she said. "I want to apologize for getting you in so much trouble back in high school. I think that song you wrote is really sweet, but back when I was younger, I was too freaked out to handle or appreciate it." I couldn't believe what she was saying. Here she was apologizing to me. "No," I said. "It's me that wants to apologize to you. I am so embarrassed about that song and that I was so obsessed with you. I'm really sorry for being so stupid back then." "It's okay," she said. "We were both really young. Plus, you've obviously grown up a lot. You're doing really well with your music and I think it's really cool." What happened next was probably the most shocking, terrifying, and awful experience I've ever had with a girl. All of a sudden, just when I felt like everything was going great, I felt my nervousness intensify to a sickening degree. The room started spinning and my heart started beating harder than ever. I really felt like I was gonna die. I couldn't catch my breath. The last thing I remember is that my head started to throb and my stomach started to hurt really bad. I couldn't see or hear anything. I blacked out. I woke up in a hotel bedroom with my tour manager and some of my band standing around. What the hell had happened? Why aren't I on the bus? Was it all a dream? Where is she? Turns out I had experienced a severe anxiety attack and my body had shut down. If that wasn't bad enough, when I lost consciousness, I almost accidentally went to the bathroom in my pants. All of this happened right in front of her, and of course she freaked out like crazy. She ran out of the bus and got security from the venue to call an ambulance. She thought I had died and was really scared. The medics determined I was fine, just a little stressed out, and took me to our hotel and gave me some fluids to rehydrate me after all the diarrhea. I don't remember anything except blackness and then waking up in the hotel. I never got the girl's phone number or had any way to follow up with her. I asked the venue security if they had seen her and they told me she left in a hurry. That was the last time I saw her and have never seen her again since.
Drove past your doorway 15 times. I don't want to cause you harm. That's what you're in for. If you don't open your door, so I'll keep knocking a million times. I will knock until my knuckles bleed.
This really personifies all these unanswered questions we're left with. This story clearly isn't true. It's too perfect, too surreal. The recording of the song he provided is very obviously a more recent recording. The production quality is too polished and his voice does not sound like that of a high schooler. He didn't even try to make it sound like an authentic recording from his childhood. Andrew WK has always either seemed unconcerned with or intentionally averse to getting all the details perfect. Like his biography that claims he was named after a killer who wasn't caught until several years after he was born. There are all these obvious inconsistencies and illusion-breaking flubs in the story that seem almost purposely built into it, like those Amish quilters who intentionally sew one of the fabric squares into their elaborate tapestries upside down because they believe that only God is capable of perfection. So, was the entire thing a lie? Did this girl ever even exist? Or was she and the original story true, but this was a fantasy coda he concocted in his mind to make himself feel better about a childhood humiliation? Was any of this real, or was Andrew WK's entire life just one big fiction? And if so, how many lies do you have to tell before it all somehow becomes the truth? And the fictional character you've crafted to embody publicly becomes the real you. During that 2012 podcast interview with Mark Maron, WK talks about appearing on a speaking panel at an arts festival on the subject of esoteric thought. During the panel, he says that one of the professors said something profound that completely reshaped his entire thought process. He said that it not only applied to esoteric thought, but to life in general. The fact that you don't understand it is the point. Andrew WK hasn't reappeared in the public light in any capacity for going on 4 years now. The last sign of life was his album release in 2021. By all accounts, he wants us to believe he's dead, that Steve Mike finally pushed his consciousness out of his body and took over full time, that he crafted his own non-existence. But there's one funny little detail. One of the weirdest career moves WK ever made was being the host of that Cartoon Network reality show, Destroy, Build, Destroy. Two teams of kids, egged on by WK, would take a functioning machine, blow it to smithereens, learn how to rebuild it back to functionality, and then blow it up again. Destroy, build, destroy. Maybe this was all only phase one. And thus closes another case file in the archives of the Mystery Treehouse. If you like the way we covered this story, please give the video a like and subscribe to our channel. We have new videos every week. You might also want to check out our podcast, the Deep Cuts Podcast, where we do multi-hour deep dives on stories just like this. You can find it on all platforms. And until next time, stay curious, chums.